All right, getting started a little bit late because Dr. Wagner is messy. So, discussion number 2, ethics and confidentiality. And I have 2 live friends with me and one in the background. Would you all want to introduce yourselves just briefly? So,
Sure. I'm Peta. I'm a senior public health student, and I've been at this for a decade plus, so
uh,
I'm eager to be done.
life student like me.
Yay!
Yeah, thanks, Peta.
Hi, I'm Mallory. I guess, technically a grad student. I have my master's. I'm just
Nice.
earning like extra credits. I work in a school, so if I earn extra credits, I can like move up my pay scale. So I
Awesome.
try and like take classes that I really like can apply. I'm a speech language pathologist that I can apply to my career. So
Great. All right. Well, let's start with the both
yep.
of you. I mean, you signed up to speak at the discussion. I started when I was in the other one all by myself. Just talking about how the alphabetical framework is in there in the course, just as a kind of an easy guide to think about. But what do y'all have interests or specific questions or concerns around ethics or confidentiality? I have some things we could discuss, but I just thought, why'd you pick this one? It might just be this one was when you're not working or you're.
It's my day off, and I
Okay,
was
great.
just eager to put it behind me, so
Oh,
here I am.
great. Thanks for your honesty. And Mallory, you're in a school, right? So it's a little bit more complicated. I cannot wait till you start watching video number 2. Have you started yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, there's like some people get entertaining in their videos, which I really appreciate as long as the skills are there. But a lot of people chose the like, is it a 10th grader who thinks they're pregnant? And then like they're like telling them they can go get an abortion. And I'm like, you all are fired. Have you been in Ohio for more than 20 seconds? Are you taking
Oh
this class
no.
from a different state or maybe even a different country right now? Because yeah, that's not. And then I'm
Oh
also
my
binge
gosh.
watching. I actually finished it already. Sorry, season 3 of what is it? Ginny in Georgia. And there's some interesting stuff in there too, related as I'm watching those demonstration of skills. So, in our profession, ethics is important. I think ethics is important in any profession, but ours, health coaching and health education and promotion in general, I think are really can be tricky places because the kind of information that we have and the kinds of things that we help people with can be pretty sensitive. And the consequences of misinformation or advice, nobody loves when I start. Everyone's always usually happy with me. Once they get over that you have to post a video on YouTube, they're like, she doesn't want us to give advice. Like, well, we could talk about that. And there is a little video a little bit later about sort of why we try to avoid that. And for me, it's an ethical thing. Some of it is just, who am I to tell someone else what to do? Like, my life is not. I have a lot of privilege and a lot of comfort, but I'm not sure anyone should take my path or follow or do those, make those same kinds of decisions. And then also, what are the repercussions when someone else decides to do what we think they should do? Then it's like, well, did they decide? Did we decide? Like, who's responsible at that point? So the ethical piece, I think, can be kind of tricky. Most of us, I think, are on the right page, though, when I'm watching your all's practice videos. Um, where we're following the client, right? And really allowing them to tell us, like, what do you need? There's at least one video that's like, well, no, there's at least 3 videos, I think, that are really interesting to watch this round for very different reasons. Um, which maybe I'm creating some excitement now around watching other people's videos. Um, but okay, so maybe let's work backwards and start with um, confidentiality. I mean, that's within ethics. One of the things I didn't really see in most people's videos, I saw it in a couple, and I'll remind folks about what the purpose and the intention of the videos are. But when we skip role induction, that can be a little bit tricky. And sometimes I think the role play scenarios that I have set up are just a little bit too, I think they could be better, frankly, to allow it for a more pure health coaching experience. But I kind of like to see what people's instincts are and really sort of see where people are going to go and what they're going to think about doing. So when we're talking about role induction, what do y'all remember about what that is or what the importance of that might be in those introductory skill spaces?
For me, I think I remember just basically that I'm here to guide, not to direct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're asking here, like my role as a
Yeah,
health
I mean, role induction is
coach.
when we're first meeting with that client, right? Where we say like, "I'm so happy to see you. I'm glad you're here. Tell me what you kind of want to work on." And then it's also like, let's set the parameters of our working relationship, right? Sort of, what's your job? What's your responsibility? And what's my job and my responsibility? It helps. I think we set people up for success when we have clear expectations. And then also, I think unfortunately, a lot of times folks are coming to us for advice, and a lot of us come to this course or even the field or this practice from a passion, not to make fun of my colleagues in exercise science, but I find them a lot. They tend to be the folks that will show up in the class and that also I see in the real world, maybe exercising a little bit outside of their scope of practice, right? And I'll use a personal example. I had a personal trainer, right, to try to help me figure out how to work out. And I was also doing triathlons actually at the moment. And every time we met, he wanted to give me nutritional advice. And like, I get it. I could work out all I want. If my diet wasn't appropriate, that could be problematic. But that's kind of way outside of his lane because he wasn't also a registered dietitian, right? And a lot of folks I find go into fields like that. I want to be a personal trainer. A lot of my students who are health and PE teachers or health education majors, they'll say, well, this is a popular story. I used to be chubby and I figured it out. And now I want to help everybody else figure it out. And it's like, okay, that sounds great, but what worked for you might not work for other people. And, again, what is your expertise, right? And so they immediately want to start talking about, well, you should be eating this much protein and you shouldn't eat, this is junk food and this is bad food, or it's like, wow, all my friends in my workspace are dietitians. None of them talk like this. And this is actually not how you help coach a person to eat in a healthful way. And it's about a lot more than what our bodies look like. It has actually much more to do with how our bodies function and how they might utilize the things that we're consuming. So that role induction helps draw those boundaries, where we say, I'm not here to tell you what to do, or I don't really have all the answers. I'm here to listen to what it is that you're interested in working on and try to see if I can hear you say some things that I can help you with. I know a lot of information. I have some expertise in certain topic areas, but also I'm just here to help sort of give you an objective person to talk through this with you. And so you'll notice that sometimes towards the early part of the semester, students will work really hard at trying to fix it all. And it's like, actually, the most magical thing you can do is sit back and let the other person talk and then say, oh, wow, that was really interesting, Peta. Like, tell me a little more about that. Or so how do you think you might work on that, right? And and an important part of that then also is the confidentiality piece. And that's kind of where I was going a little bit earlier with Mallory. The other piece was when a 10th grader comes to us to talk about their pregnancy scare, there's no keeping that from all the other adults. Again, unless you want to get fired and then maybe even go to jail. So that confidentiality does not exist with minors. And so sometimes I think that role play kind of just puts people in a pickle to start off because they want to really focus on. And now I'm thinking about one of my students who's doing it from her National Guard service. I don't know if you saw that one, but her partner has the baby at the end of the video. uh, which is really cute. But also that student is going to be earning a license to teach in a school. And so it's like, ooh, okay, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about how we might work on some of these things, right? Because obviously I have opinions. People get pregnant around me all the time. And as a child-free person, I have all sorts of opinions about who should or shouldn't and whether they have too many or they're good at it, right? And nobody wants any of those, first of all. Let's just say that. But also, why would I put that on somebody else? What is, it's not for me to tell people what their options are. So one of those big limits of confidentiality is for minors, but also when people are communicating with us that they pose a risk to themselves or to other people. I don't know if y'all have been paying attention or if you're even local. I know some of us are in Colorado and all over the space this summer, but we've had 2 murder-suicides in like our county area in just the last 2 weeks. And it's like, yikes, okay. And so when someone is expressing, suicidal thoughts or homicidal thoughts or Nowadays, we deal a lot with people who perpetrate large scale violence, and often there is some red flags, not that we notice them all or that we're necessarily irresponsible if we miss them, but we do want to be thoughtful about those limits. And so sometimes I don't always start with those depending on what we're talking about, but at a point when I'm working with someone where they start moving in a direction is when I'll say, like, hey, I just want to let you know that, as a university employee, for example, I'm required to report sexual violence under Title IX. Even if you're telling me about something that happened to you when you're in the third grade, I have a legal responsibility to report that to the university. And then I'll also follow up with, that doesn't mean anything necessarily, right? You get to choose what to do with that. But when I have had several students in my office expressing suicidal ideation. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the semester, but what exactly do you do with that and how exactly do you handle that? Confidentiality is not the space. And so there are going to be times where we are going to tell what people tell us. Generally, I talk about confidentiality in all of my classes because we do tend to talk about things that are personal. And so I'll say confidentiality is a little bit different from anonymity, right? Because none of my students are anonymous to me. I know your names. Sometimes I know your banner ID. I can know all kinds of things about you. And gosh, I just finished my 28th year at Kent State. So I'll constantly be using former students or things students said in class as an example, but I never point out that student, right? So that would be an example of keeping that information confidential. So you might have even read that on the syllabus, that sometimes students might share things in our discussions that then we feel like we want to repeat for whatever reason. And that I just generally ask that we respect each other's privacy by not sharing that person's story without their consent. You can share the story, but just not give the authorship, right? Or the ownership of the story as that confidentiality piece. Do either of you have any thoughts or comments on confidentiality? You're here to talk. I just want to make sure you're not staring at me while
sorry.
I'm doing all the talking. No, it's okay, Mallory.
I was just gonna say that, like, obviously it's so important, but it can be so hard, like at work and at school.
Yeah.
Just people like to talk, and there's
And you have a
lots
whole
of
other code of professional ethics as well, right? Where you do have some
yeah.
ability as a health professional with a very specific license and training, but also,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's just easy to get like wrapped up in other people telling you like, "Oh, did you hear that this happened?" And it's really difficult to just, be like, "Okay, I can't listen to that. I'm not interested. Like, please don't share
Yeah.
that with me." Especially when it's like supervisors, people who are, above you, and they're sharing
Yeah.
something and you're just like, "Why are you," like, almost like, "Can you just not tell me?" Like, it would
Yeah.
just be easier if you didn't tell me.
I
But
know. I had some students on
it can be really
campus a
tough.
few weeks ago, and one of them I was like, "Ugh, I'm a mandated reporter. I really should have probably called Children's Services." And then some of my friends said, "Well, what was that student's name?" I'm like, "I don't know." "What school did they go to?" I'm like, "I don't know." And I'm like, all right, that seems like I'm rationalizing that it was okay, and that student is connected in ways that, but and when
Yes,
I did my
child services
internship,
stuff too.
yeah, when I did my internship, I worked at Rape and Sexual Assault Services in Akron, and we would see minors for 2 sessions, I think, maybe 3, without taking any identifying information, because unfortunately, what we find is that the vast majority of time it's a familial or some kind of relation, and so the person coming needed that privacy. But as someone just coming out of undergrad, I was like, we don't tell their like what's going on. It can be tricky. You're right, Mallory. That, and then like all the weird quasi inappropriate humor that like outside of our field and our office people would be like, what is wrong with you folks, right? But that inside is maybe just how we cope with other people's trauma. But Peta, did you want to say? You don't have to, but
No, I was just going to mention too, similar to what Mallory said, that I also work at the university and I work for a vice president. So I'm not privy
which
to
one? No,
everything.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Um, but there are things that I know, and I'll
Right.
sometimes have colleagues come up and, "Oh, what do you
Yeah.
hear?" And you have to be really careful, because sometimes it's not just university things, but it's personnel things, and it's
Right.
just it's tricky
And we
sometimes.
have to trust that our system and our policies
Yeah.
work appropriately, right? And that there's a reason maybe you and I aren't the person to share that information,
Yeah.
right? That
100%.
it coming out of the more appropriate channels
Yeah. It's
is
not
for a
my news.
reason. Yeah. And that hasn't always been my opinion here, but our provost and our president, should they be watching, I really do trust at this moment. It's like, I don't always agree and I don't always
Yeah.
understand, but I really strongly believe that they're in the right space. And so I'm just going to try to comply. Right. Well, okay, that's a good kind of a good segue to ethics, right? And one of the things I want us to keep in mind, and maybe I'll just kind of put it out there and see what each of you think about it, or if anyone wants to contribute. I don't think ethics are universal. And I think most of us have professional ethics, right? Especially if we belong to an actual discipline where we sign off. I sign off on my code of ethics every year. And it's not the kind like for lawyers or medical physicians where they can like disbar you or fire you. My credential is just a master certified health education specialist. So I can lose that, but I don't actually need that to practice. So it's not really that threatening to lose it, other than to my ego and my own personal reputation. Which brings me to that idea, though, that for me, Lori exists, right? And Lori has a pretty clear code of ethics based on my life experience. And then at one point, Lori started working for Kent State. And I never know where that sphere is, right? And then at some point, Lori also became Dr. Wagner. And I'm not always all of those three things at once. Sometimes I am. And sometimes what Dr. Wagner would do and what Lori would do aren't exactly the same thing. And depending on in which circumstances I'm in, I might follow that code a little bit differently. Do you, each of you, do you think of those like sort of connected, but not necessarily fully overlapping spheres where, I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of the reasons I work at a university, because my main interest is sexuality. And I absolutely refuse to work in a middle school or high school in the state of Ohio the way we have to. I won't do it. So I
Yeah.
would be fired to do it, right? So then my personal ethics would trump the rules. And so
I think for me, I just kind of have my personal ethics and morals, that help to guide me. But then I do also follow ethics for my job as well. Certain things about accepting gifts and that kind
yeah,
of thing we're not allowed to do. And I
yeah.
understand why. But for me, it's primarily just my personal ethics that help to guide what I do and how I
Yeah.
feel.
I think we're fortunate too that we work in an environment in which we probably wouldn't be asked to do something that would violate
Yeah.
our personal ethics.
Yeah.
In fact, I know Kevin West would very much prefer
Yeah.
none of us violate any ethical. Mallory, if you don't know, Kevin West is, he's not, I always call him university attorney, which he does not appreciate, but he's pretty much for administrative affairs on the academic personnel side. So he's who I call when I'm in trouble and who I hear from when I'm maybe in trouble. um, what about you, Mallory? Similar kind of
Yeah, I
all?
was gonna say I feel fortunate that I think what I do in my career, I feel like I've mentioned in this course, I teach a lot of students that are primarily in resource rooms. So they have high needs. And thankfully, my personal ethics, I feel like coincide with my professional ethics in terms of, giving children a voice. A lot of my students don't use oral language to speak. A lot of them have communication devices, and sometimes that gets tricky on like a personal level with parents.
Yeah.
Like, why are you not doing, like, why aren't you trusting in the process or believing in it? But then you also have to be, professional and prove it to them that,
Yeah.
evidence-based practice, whatnot with that. But it gets tricky. And something I thought was interesting I wanted to share that happened in my school district a few months ago was that a parent felt like their daughter was not being treated properly at school. So they put a listening device on her,
Oh.
sent to school. And then over spring break, she like went through everything and found like clips where her daughter is not being treated right and then posted it like all over social media, all over like everything. It was people are talking about it on Facebook, everywhere, every kind of social media. And it put like a lot of people, you know, with ethics and confidentiality, but then also like the daughter wasn't being treated correctly, but she has really high special needs. So she's not able to go home and say, Mom, my teachers won't, you know, feed me or help me. But, you know, it just got our
posting on
school and
Instagram maybe wasn't the right way to go either.
yeah.
Right?
And then like you also
you probably
can't
would have
put
got a
those on
reaction.
children. Yeah. So like our whole school district got in a lot of trouble and everyone's just like, beware, someone's always listening to you. It just kind of makes you feel like, ugh, like,
all
you know,
1984 all over again, right? Yeah,
so it
Peter,
was
I saw
just
your T-shirt. I keep saying it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
Worst days ahead. Yeah, it stays until things get better.
Oh, yeah, that's
that
a
was
hard
just
one.
a little interesting thing I wanted to share that I think relates a little bit to this topic.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks for that
curious
perspective.
too, how posting like that may have affected any kind of legal outcome for the child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure
And
they
then
were
it's
thinking
like,
about that. And I guess I shouldn't judge. I guess I don't know that they didn't take appropriate, maybe they took
Sure.
appropriate steps first and they were ignored. And so then we're all like, I'm going to the media, right? Who knows?
who knows?
And I do
Right.
have a nephew. I express it as on the severe end of the spectrum. He is currently actually in a residential situation. He is going on 16 and does not communicate verbally, nor I thought the iPad was going to be the magic when he was really little. And it was not. And I remember that frustration of him coming home and the normative thing to say is, how was your day? And you don't know. And so I can identify with how terrifying that is to not know if they were hurt or harmed, or he would come home. I had him on my own for a week and he came home and I could tell something was wrong and he just vomited and collapsed. And I was like, not great. And that was the day his mom left. His family had left for their weeks-long vacation. I'm like, I'm not calling him back, but yikes. Right? A very difficult auntie moment. And so, yeah, I can identify with that. But yeah, the way people just put everything on social media, I think is.
Yeah, and the
I'm also
teachers,
thinking
you know,
about
like
that
they didn't get
student who didn't consent to that
either. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like that's my personal experience. That was my trauma, and you just advertised it without my consent. Anyways, tricky. All right. Well, I think you brought up some interesting things. Simple stuff, like Peter said, we can't accept gifts, right? And I always it's not a popular opinion on our campus, but I'm a champion for faculty and students not having romantic relationships. I get a lot of like, but they're not minors. I'm like, okay, let's talk about power imbalance. And the dating pool is larger than just your graduate students or whatever, the undergrads that I don't know. But again, I grew up with very conservative values. So for me, that's an easy one. I've never been tempted by. So tricky. I think what can be difficult about ethical situations, at least for me, is when we have to figure out what to do right now. Like, this thing is happening. I'm watching it. This is not really great. What do I do? I think my alphabet model breaks down in those situations because we need a couple minutes at least to think about, okay, who's the most important person right here? Obviously the person we're trying to help is important, but that doesn't mean we're not important. We have to be thoughtful about all those moving pieces. And so I think that framework can really help us with that. And I also think it helps me with the avoiding advice piece, the idea of, again, what is the situation here, right? And what are the options, not just for the individual, but what are my options? Because yeah, I can tell you what I think you should do, but what are the consequences of that? Or I can ask you what you think your options are, in which case I would suggest others if I hear you missing some that I think are also out there. But that also can be a little bit tricky though, because then I might have put that idea in someone's head. And so being thoughtful about that. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I'm getting all of the things that I was hoping to get. And then just straight up misinformation. I've only ever in all of my time here, allowed a grad student to teach our human sexuality class like once or twice. Because I just found that the boundaries between the students in the class and the instructor of that class can be really tricky for people with less experience, because there's just so much of, but what is the best contraceptive, or but what do you think, like what would you do, or can I, a lot of, can I talk to you after class about this situation, and people just really starving for it, advice and help. And I think it's kind of related to what Mallory, what you were bringing up earlier, that it can be really difficult when you see someone struggling to not say, okay, here's what you do. Right. I have a friend who's sending their daughter here, and I said, I'm happy to be their academic advisor, and they and I will have a conversation about, when am I talking to you as someone that I pretty much consider my niece, and when will I be talking to you as a Kent State student? Because our personal relationship will mean you'll get more of my opinions than I would give to a typical student. I never say to a student, like, do not take that instructor, they're terrible. But I would say that to a friend, for example. That's a light one, right? And I would never tell a student, I don't know, maybe I have told my student they need to change their majors. I did have a student who failed chemistry 5 times and still wanted to go to PA school. And I was like, yeah, but you're not going to get in. So like, I didn't say it like that at all. But it's like, I recognize that that's what you want. I don't see that happening though. And I want to make sure we're getting you graduated out with a degree that you can actually use. But there again, I would be a little bit more assertive, not all the way, with somebody that I had a personal relationship with. My best friend from high school, he gets really mad at me all the time. He's like, just tell me what to do. You're an expert. I'm like, that's my expertise, is helping you figure out what to do, not telling you what to do. So. When you look at the Code of Ethics for Health Education, you'll see the spheres. They're not really spheres there, but the levels, right? Responsibility to the public and to our employers and to our professional preparation. Being, again, really clear about what we know and what we don't know. I say all the time, like, I'm not the kind of doctor that bills, I didn't go to medical school. My doctorate is a PhD. It's a doctorate of philosophy. So it's a little bit different there in terms of, can I diagnose your STI? No, and I have no interest in doing so, but I can talk about what they are, and we can talk about the symptoms. And if anything, I can help that person find that resource or that reference. But anything else that we should add to our conversation? I don't want to keep you late because I got us started late. All right. Well, thank you. That's all right. Thank you to PETA and Mallory for participating in the conversation to me. And thanks, Braden, for showing up. Again, my apologies for the duplicate links. So I will make sure I clean that up. I did go through the video playlists today, and I think I cleaned those ones up, but obviously now I need to go back and clean up the live discussion links. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Just a friendly reminder that everybody, the 3 of you that are here, have earned your credit, and everybody else, because I'm working from home today and I'm on my iPad, it won't be till tomorrow morning that I'll post the discussion questions, because it's just easier on my computer to move the transcript, and I might need to edit some of the front part out. And so that'll be ready tomorrow, and then everyone seems to be accessing those questions really well and getting their points that way. So I'm going to stop the discussion for the recording.